is December 29th, 12:08 a.m. I'm looking at volume weighted price, average price, VWAP. It's called VWAP. And I'm seeing an interesting correlation in the behavior of the stocks related to a couple conditions. One of them, I have a list of stocks that I'm looking at, and one of them is today. Each of the indices, Dow Jones, Nasdaq, and S&P, dropped each 1%. So it was a bearish day. So I pulled up Apple here, and Apple is so this purple line right here is the VWAP. And the interesting thing is it started out at the high point, and then as it declined in price, the VWAP started to decline as well. And at about 10 a.m., it achieved a low of the day, somewhere around here, 10 a.m. to 10:20 a.m., somewhere around there for Apple. And then it started to climb. And then it met up with the VWAP line. And then immediately after hitting VWAP, it started to retrace down and ultimately ended up a low of the day. What seems to be interesting is that this is indicating a bearish condition. If the price is below the VWAP, it means that it's bearish. If it's above, it's bullish. There's a couple stocks that are on my list, radar, that is bullish today, but in general, most of the stocks were bearish. So this is Apple, bearish. As soon as it hit the VWAP on a bearish day, it retraced. So that is an indication of possibly when something like this occurs on a bearish day, it is possible to short at this point. And turns out that I can make money on this. That is something that I could that is something that I can revisit later on. So this is in itself, this is ABV, and it's also showing similar characteristics. At around this point, it achieved a low, and then attempted to meet up with VWAP, but it didn't, and started to retrace. This is Adobe, and the way that it behaved the same way. It lagged a little bit before it reached a low, intraday second low, and then it went up and achieved this point here and attempted to get to VWAP, but it started to drop down. Also a bearish trend. Looking at AMD, AMD is similar. It achieved a low at around this point here, achieving a double bottom, and this actually was up a little bit above VWAP, and so it was less bearish, and it hovered around there, and ultimately it ended up essentially a neutral situation. It was down today, but essentially it was neutral. Amgen is the same story. Same story here. Down, bearish, VWAP, and then down. Now Amazon essentially went up a little bit, and then just like the other stocks, triple top here and double bottom here. Here it met up with the VWAP and it started to retrace. So again, this is confirming that it is possible. Maybe a stop loss. So when an entry occurs here, a stop loss would above somewhere here would be sufficient. I think maybe there's some sort of a resistance line somewhere here that I can use as a range as a region of interest for stop loss, and then buy a put. That could have been a that could have been a that essentially could possibly it would have been sufficient move to that would have been a sufficient move, but it would have taken quite a bit of time. Avago is the same way. This is the VWAP line, the purple line, as it dipped, and then it achieved a sort of a bottom at this point and attempted to move towards a VWAP, but after this is essentially a bearish trend here, and it attempted to meet up with a rendezvous with the VWAP, and then it started to go down. That was a common theme today. So Boeing is slightly different, and it's similar to what AMD was doing, and it actually had a late day somewhere around about 10 o'clock, and it started to pick up and actually just shot right above VWAP, which meant it's essentially a neutral condition. When it shoots up like that, generally that most likely either will be neutral, which essentially have converted itself from being a bearish situation to essentially a neutral situation. So it reverted at this point right there. Now this is a bullish trend, so it was neutral for a while, and then at this stage it established a low of the day and started going up, and then once it was above VWAP, it just stayed there for the rest of the day. Same thing with all banks. Banks had this same characteristics. Then Citigroup is one of them. Here's Coin, which seems to mimic what AMD and Boeing was doing, essentially setting up the low double bottom here, what climbed above VWAP, and then just became neutral throughout the day. Now here's a Costco, which is a NASDAQ component, and it was bearish all day, all throughout here, and then established a low somewhere around at about 10 o'clock, and then overshot the VWAP a little bit, and then started to decline after it set up a little high there. So it's essentially a bearish condition, and it met with the VWAP, and the VWAP was an indication that is to establish a point where the stock was going to retrace. CRM is another one. Same thing here. See, it's bearish, it reaches VWAP, and it just drops. CVX is sort of that neutral AMD and Boeing kind of a type of situation. And here we go. This Dillard was bearish all day. It attempted to reach, yeah. So this is a spider Dow component, and again, it's behaving very similar to behaving like the VWAP. VWAP is a very interesting thing here. Look at that. It attempted to go and then started to drop. This is probably the point where I could have essentially shorted 85.40. Wow, that would have been almost $1 within like 11.12 to 12.12. So that's essentially within an hour. It could have been a $1 move. $1 right there. FedEx is another component that did that. Google, and Google is doing the same thing right there. You see that? VWAP, it's above VWAP and it goes down like that. Home Depot has the same story. When it takes a serious downturn right here, it's possible to take a short on here. That's essentially what's essentially, look at that. Let's look at the bearish condition. Even IBM was doing that too. It's Intel was doing the same thing, and I'm going through every one of these, and IWM, iShares is doing the same thing too. This IW shares must have many stocks that behave the same way. J&J, but later on down the road, it attempted to. If I were to have shorted here, that would have been win, 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 and then boom, loss right there, and that possibly could have caused a stop loss, maybe. JPM is one of those bank stocks that were bullish today, essentially hovering around the other side of Vwap. It made contact with the Vwap here and it immediately shot up. And here we go, similar story with a bearish condition. Lockheed Martin did the same thing. Lowe's did the same thing here. And MasterCard and Microchip is another one that did that. And here we go. Here's Meta, perfectly doing the same thing. It retraced all the way back to where the low of the day was and finished closely in just essentially, had I gotten in somewhere here after waiting patiently for it, that would have been 117.35. That's almost $2. That would have been a very good trade. Now this is a similar to, I think, maybe that's the bank stocks. Yeah. Perfect scenario. Bearish, touchdown, and then comes back down. And Micron is one of them. Was deeply bearish. Netflix, similar story, but it recovered a bit. And Nike is a similar story. Nvidia is one of those that essentially became neutral, it looks like. And XPI is one prime one that actually bearish attempted to, but it declined and rejected. Another day, it could have been a different story. Same here. PayPal. Oh, look at that QQQ right there. See that? That there. See, QQQ is made up of several different stocks. And so that is a very telling kind of a situation. Interesting. Same thing with Corvo. Essentially a semiconductor stock. See, S-Box is there. Snow is essentially neutral. This is an indication that it is essentially neutral at this point. Oh, very, very interesting. If somehow this, I'm beginning to get some sort of indication of what seems to be happening. When a stock dips way below VWAP, it'll use most of its energy to get to this point. When it gets to this point, it'll retrace. But if the dip is shallow, then it's when it attempts to go towards it, it may just go overshoot and just become either a neutral stock or even become a bullish condition. SQ is essentially slightly bearish based on this because it overshot. Yeah, exactly. This is the one that essentially is just creating, essentially saying that it is bearish. It's bearish. Target is essentially slightly bearish because it actually overshot. Thermo Fisher was extremely bearish right there. That is just pure indication of how bearish that is. And Tesla today was essentially neutral. It gained some, and then it became neutral respect to the VWAP. TI essentially is behaving just like what a normal semiconductor stocks are doing. Had I gotten in at about a time period of this point here, essentially here, which is 161.4, so essentially that would have been a $1 move right there. This tells me that when it reached there, it's less bullish than something that has a peak at about here. That's what it's saying. UAL is behaving the same way, dipped enough, this far enough that it recovered and then dipped. It didn't overshoot. Again, the volatility of the stock is a gauge that says how far away from the VWAP is a predictor of how it's going to behave. The oil behaves differently. And V somehow seems to be related to Microsoft and some of the other technology stocks as well. Bank stock, yep, there we go. It established a peak there and it started to drop. Walmart here, similar story, but it actually ended there. So this one is actually quite a bit bearish. And based on the amount of loss that I incurred, that's why this never reached up to VWAP. This never reached to VWAP. So this first indication is an indication that whenever it goes up to a certain point here and establishes this point, it's really bearish. So by this time, this is saying the stock is very bearish. So if I were to have gotten in here and waited to the close, which is essentially probably almost a $2 move, yeah, about a $1.50 move. That is a significant move from here to here, all the way to close. So that is a relationship between VWAP and whether the stock is bullish or bearish or mild or whatever the situation is. And it's an indication because it is reflecting by the volume. The volume is saying that volume.